Life isn't perfect, and neither are we.
Nope. But we know how to face our fears
And have some fun.
and talk about all the messiest things of life.
Like the messiest things.
Get connected to yourself, get connected to others, and get connected to the life right in front of you.
This is The Connected Life with Justin and Abby.
That's me.
That's you.
And you.
Hey, Abby. Hey, Abby.
Uh-huh.
I see dead people.
Oh. Do you?
No, I don't. I don't.
But you dream of them.
I do dream of dead people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be part of what we're talking about today. Dreaming
So
of the dead.
That's so ominous. That is so
It's a
funny.
good hook, isn't it?
I guess.
I guess.
We'll see.
Uh-huh. He dreams of dead people. Well, today we're going to talk about making peace with the dead.
I know. I think that's such a catchy hook that we talked about. And I'm glad we're processing this. This is something I haven't heard a lot of people talk about.
Yeah.
But I think that it's really important to do. And so what we're talking about is, we don't really get to control when people die.
Yeah.
And where our relationship is at when they die. And so a lot of us feel regret or unresolved issues or sad about how a relationship ended or where things were. And that can feel really powerless if you think once they're dead, that was the chance I had to resolve things.
Yes.
And so for both of us, I think we haven't viewed death as the end of resolve.
Yeah.
As in for me personally, I'll just jump into my own story. And then
okay.
We'll get into yours.
We'll let you have that then.
I've been noticing this year, one of the things I've noticed a lot, I just kicked off my shoes. You can tell I'm making myself at home.
Please do.
I've been noticing this year that every time my aunt and grandma come up in my mind's eye, they're both dead and I imagine them in heaven. And I am always imagining them frustrated at me or angry at me. I didn't notice that until this year. And then it just started to become very clear that I was like, oh, not only did I feel unsafe in my relationship with them on earth, like now even imagining them dead, I'm imagining them with dead judgment towards me.
Yeah.
And frustration. And so I've been purposefully going on the journey because I know basically like a lot of us take our inner critic and we put it on people's faces in our imaginations. And so I often, in the past, I used to do this all the time. I'd be like, oh, Justin must think that I'm not pretty enough, or, oh, Pizzi must think that I am too flaky, or whatever our judgment of ourselves is. We imagine the people around us are thinking that. And that's a way that we judge ourselves through other people's faces, which is not fair for other people. We don't even know if that's what they're thinking of us. But That's something that we often do with the dead. Is we imagine they are still judging us. They are still
From
frustrated
beyond the
with us.
grave.
Yes. And so that means that there's just a part of my life that is not connected to love. And I don't want any areas of my life not connected to love. And I do believe in redemption and wholeness. And I was thinking about, I have one more thing and then we'll have you share about your story a little bit. But in therapy, there's this exercise that we often do where you imagine your parents, like maybe you imagine your mom or your dad, and you imagine what if they had all of the support and love that they needed? What if they had people around them that were teaching them how to love and helping them process their emotions, and counselors who were compassionate and kind to them? And what if they had people that were giving, like if they were stressed out by work, if they had people who were helping them get things done? Like what if your mom or dad had all of the support they needed? And what if they had all the love and the patience and the compassion they needed? Then who would that person have been? Because oftentimes that helps us imagine the most authentic version of our parents.
Yeah.
Because most of the things that hurt us about people's behavior is the coping mechanisms they use to deal with stress, to use to deal with pain, to deal with loneliness, to deal with rejection, all of the things. When we don't have the love we need, we do a lot of crazy things in order to cope with that. And so we try to get people to imagine who would they be if they were getting all the love they need? And that is typically where I start with when I imagine people who are dead. is I start with, what if they're getting all of the love that they've ever needed? What if all the areas they weren't parented in, they're getting parented in? What if all of the places they didn't feel enough, they're getting to feel like they're enough? What if all the areas they have had shame is wiped away? And I try to imagine what that eternal essence, because I think there's an eternal part of me underneath all of my coping mechanisms that is my authentic essence. And so I'm trying to imagine, what is their authentic essence if you strip away all the coping mechanisms and all the ways they survived being a human? What is that part of them left?
Yeah, part of what you're talking about, some of the ways that I define it is as our redeemed self. The part of ourself that is reconnected into love, what we were made in and through. And what you're talking about is us going through a process of like letting go of the idea that their self-protective mechanisms are who they were. Like, I think of my grandpa, for example. Can I jump into this? So my grandfather in life, a lot of the ways that he showed up was very intensely angry and gruff and shut down and shut off. Now, when you got him in moments where, say, he was playing cards, you saw his
playful,
mischievous, innocent, childlike self come out, and he was very relatable, and he felt like a really cool buddy. And when you got him on a good day where he wasn't carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, say in his business, I might come in and he'd lean over to me and be like, "Hey, come here. Here's $5. Don't tell grandma I gave this to you, and go get yourself a G.I. Joe."
Cute.
And I could see the glimmer. You'd see the glimmer, and that's his redeemed self, that part of himself that isn't connected to fear, that part of himself that is connected into a sense of love and presence with the person across from him. And so, but when he, the journey of his life was one that was very self-protective. And he was known very strongly within our town as one of the most scary, hardened men.
Oh, yeah. When we got married and we would go into places in your hometown and people would say like, "Oh, you're Justin Stumble. Are you related to Arnie?" And then you'd be like, "Yes." And they'd be like, "I'm so sorry."
Totally. Like, I've had run-ins with that guy.
Yeah.
But that was his protective armor. Like, that was his survival technique. His dad died during the Depression at 10 years old, and he was left, like, him and his family almost starved to death.
Right.
And he suddenly was trying to take care of his family, and all he knew was like, I just have to survive a world that isn't set up to protect me. I'm all alone inside of it. And so you're getting that representation of him. And so there was a battlefield of destruction that he left behind him in his self-protective measures that left a lot of people guarded. Me, myself, I went through my own journey of guardedness and pain and process, which I've talked about in episodes in the past. But when he passed away, it was very interesting because he came in a dream. It was within the night of he passed away or within the week. He ended up, myself, my sister, and my mom all had dreams where he came and he apologized for the way that he had treated all of us.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if that's like from beyond the grave conversation that's happening. It's our psyches like reconciling with him. Who knows? But I know that my experience was that I got a man who was deeply tender. And his personality wasn't his self-protective mechanisms, right? So his personality was always there under all of it, but I'm seeing the fullness of it expressed inside of this dream as he comes with such gentleness and such compassion. And this sense of like, I could tell that when he's having this conversation with me, he understands. Like, oh, I get it. I now see from the lens of love. And I see what happened. And it was almost, it's a sense of like, he wasn't bound by the shame that we feel inside of earth where we're in all of this judgment and stuff. he was actually connected to freedom from shame when he came to me. And that's where I was getting.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah, totally.
When we're our most loved selves, then we can love without shame.
Right.
So he can have compassion for your experience without the shame. Most of the time, the shame that we feel is what keeps us from loving extravagantly, is what keeps us from being others focused.
Yeah.
Like on earth, he might have been so protective. His ego might have been too hurt to be able to fully have compassion on your experience. But when you are feeling fully loved in your mess, then you can actually extend the love and grace that you are connected to.
Yeah. And I could feel that sense of, with him not having shame, he could actually be like, I'm really sorry for the way that I affected you in this experience while I was there. And I could feel like he wasn't doing it so that he could feel better about himself. Again, when we have shame, oftentimes our apologies come from, I just want to feel better about the brokenness that I've done inside of people's world. But it felt like it was focused on me. Other-centered love that was like, I care about the condition of your existence and what happened for you. So all that to say, that was wildly impactful for me inside of that. Even though we had already been on our healing journey, what was impactful about it was me being able to see a more fuller picture of Arnie. And I remember it led to a progressive tenderization inside of me. I'm like, but what was over here wasn't him. This was actually him. This is who he was. And that began a journey for me of repairing something inside of my heart, like a bunch of history over the course of the next few years of visiting pieces of my history through the lens of, here's a tender man who really loved me. And if he would have, he could have, he would have expressed love in this fashion. And I started now painting all those experiences with that sense of that. So I have more to say about that, but
Yeah, I mean, I think that it has been really profound for you. You've had several dreams throughout the years with him in it that have felt really meaningful and impactful. And so I know for you, being able to imagine this person and imagining them soft and loving towards you, then you've been able to infuse that back into your history.
It's interesting because as we're talking right now, I just had a burst of tears like come up to my eyes. And I remember this time in his workplace when I was 18 and he was throttling my sister, and she was, 14 years old, 13 or 14. And she came back crying. It was on a Saturday. And I went into defense mode finally. And I verbally assaulted the guy in a way no one ever dared.
Yeah.
And I was like, you want to try to destroy us. That's fine. I will pick up the sword which you operate out of, and I will destroy you. And I remember just laying into him, leaving, and then he ends up following me home to our house. And he comes in, and my dad was gone for the weekend, and he starts apologizing to my mom and I for the ways that he was like, I don't know why I do these things. I don't want to be this way. And he was crying. No one had ever seen this man cry.
Wow.
It's weird. Again, these emotions are hitting me really hard right now as we're talking about this. Because I remember when I revisited that moment, I revisited it with his redeemed self standing next to me. I don't know how else to put it, but in my mind, I visualized that redeemed expression of him coming and being like, I don't mean to do this. I'm so sorry that I did this. And I could feel even the impact of what he was feeling from me responding. Like I spent years putting up with that stuff from him. And it was reasonable for an 18-year-old to finally respond in that way. But I had grief in a whole new way about how I had responded to him, because I could see his kid self. I could see his authentic self hidden behind layers of self-protection, being like, I don't want to do this. I don't know why I treat people this way. I'm so sorry, as I'm just yelling at him for how he's just leveled my 13-year-old sister. And what it did for me is it perpetuated a reconciliation in my past, both in the sense of like, oh, this wasn't someone trying to hurt me. Love, if it could have been available, it would have been on the table right here. So there was a man that did love me that couldn't express it, and I could connect with the weight of that. Like, he did love. At the same time, I could also, I also went into levels of my own grief for me showing up outside of the bounds of love. Again, we could justify it, and we could even put it to, it's reasonable that I did it. Sure. I don't have shame about it, but I actually entered into grief of like, oh, that isn't how that wasn't my authentic self. My authentic self wouldn't throttle someone like that. My authentic self is really tender and really kind and really just wants to have connection with his grandfather. And so there was a love that I also poured out on myself as I was in that moment, grieving about how I'd done that and been like, no, here's who I am, here's who I wanted to be, and here's what I needed, and here's the ideal situation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, I'm thinking about my mom. So my mom is not technically dead. And so this is a really interesting part. Ambiguous grief is the term that they call it when you have grief that goes on forever, but you don't have like a specific date. So like, my mom who has dementia, anybody with dementia, that's ambiguous grief. You're like grieving all the time. The person you loved is gone, but they're not fully dead. You don't have a date that you can visit their death. You can't go visit their memorial. They say divorce is ambiguous grief because no matter what happens, once you have separated from somebody that you were that intertwined with, there is a loss that you have forever that goes on and on. It doesn't mean that you don't have redemption or come back or find new joy in life. It just means that there is a grief that goes on. And there's lots of different forms of ambiguous grief. But another one would be, like prisoners of war or people who disappear and you never know what happened to them. Like just that feeling of opened up grief that hasn't been closed is a form of ambiguous grief. And so I've obviously been working through that. And for me, this eternal redeemed version of my mom is one of the ways that I have worked through a lot of my issues with her. So I think she's alive, and I know she's alive. I don't think that she's alive, but her brain cannot function in a way that she can communicate to me, and we can't have connection. But I believe that the essence of who she is, I believe that's an eternal thing. I think she's made in the image of God, who is an eternal being. And so I think the essence of her, the most true, authentic part of her still goes on. And I think when people die, or even when she just has no longer the capacity to be here, that essence doesn't end. That like your grandfather's love for you doesn't end just because he's not on earth.
Right.
And so mine would be like my mom's love towards me doesn't end just because I can't experience it. And like the truth is my mom, before she had dementia, she was locked up in mental illness. And so there was a level of not getting her authentic, redeemed self for many years. And so I've started having, I'd say in the last few years, at least half of my counseling sessions are grieving my mom, grieving the relationship of that, grieving not having a mom. Again, it'd be so much easier if there was like a death date and if it was final. But so one of the things that will typically happen is I will I'll visualize her authentic essence, which I know is like her authentic essence was like so kind and so tender and compassionate and playful and broke the rules. Like she was just childlike in so many fun ways. And so I'll just visualize me getting to like go to her. And sometimes it'll just be telling her about like, hey, this thing happened and I'm sad you missed it, you know?
Yeah.
Or like it was just my 40th birthday. And so I had a counseling session where I just visualized her eternal essence and me just telling that redeemed part of her.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I wish I could have told you all about my 30s and now I'm 40 without you. And I feel sad about that, but feeling, because the visualization is of a loved being, it's not like I hear words necessarily back from her, but it's like the feeling of like, I know my mom, her authentic self, would want to be here with me. I know she would want me to not feel alone. I know she would have wanted me to have a mom. I know she would have wanted to listen to all the things that happened to me in my 30s. I know she would have. And so there's just that feeling of, and it's been really special to me to be able to feel like there's still a way to get resolved. There's still a way, like there's still, you know, things that I've been able to tell her, like, this was really hard for me, but imagining her shame-free essence.
Yeah.
The part of her, you know, I've listened to so many near-death experiences, and a lot of them have life reviews where they go back through their life and they experience what life was like for the people around them, like how they impacted the people around them. But all of them are doing that life review in the presence of unconditional love.
Mm-hmm.
So they all say that it's unlike anything they've ever experienced because they can own and see their impact, but without shame.
Mm-hmm.
And so that idea feels like what I imagine her eternal being is connected to love. And so I can have the conversations where I can just, for me, it's that closing my eyes and being present enough with my own self to say, Mom, I miss you, or I wish that we would have been closer, or I'm sad that I couldn't take better care of you. Whatever the thing is, being able to actually still feel the feelings, grieve, and have a voice about it. Mm-hmm. If I decided that because she's not able to have conversations that all of everything needed to be resolved, that would cut me off. And there is, like, I feel so much different when I'm able to have a conversation and connect to something, to resolve something in me about her. And I think that I wish there is a loneliness that you feel when you've lost someone that meant something to you. Yeah. There's a loneliness. There's a hole in your heart and a hole in your life. And so I think being able to visualize, you know, like my mom, she grew up, her dad left when she was really young, and her mom worked and went to school full time to provide for them. And so there was a lot of places she didn't get the care she needed. And so visualizing her having all the care that she needs.
Yeah.
And then that version getting to listen to my heart just feels like a very redemptive healing. And I can feel like I can get into that flow state of getting to let out some of the trapped feelings that I have.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'll use my grandpa still as part of the process. There's a few that have passed away, but one of the things that was really valuable for me, let me back up. There's certain conversations that we don't get to have with people.
Yeah.
And that's a bummer for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those conversations might be conflict resolution conversations. Mm-hmm. Some of them might just be the conversations about how we felt about the person that we never got to share.
How much we loved them.
Yeah. And it's really been impactful because I've both internalized this conversation and just spoken it out loud for the well-being of my own soul, where, you know, there's aspects of it all that I told my grandpa, here are things that I didn't say that I needed to about the pain that was inflicted. Mm-hmm. And then there was aspects of me imagining what his redeemed expression might say to that. Kind of, you were bringing that up a little bit with your mom, but being able to sit in like, oh, how would he be nurturing, knowing that that little boy actually inside of him deeply loved all of his family and was trying to protect them. You know, how would he show up? And I've been able to have like these visualizations internally where I can see him holding me and being like, it really mattered that I couldn't be there in these ways. And it makes sense that you were angry about that. That was really painful what I did. And that was so profound for me to begin to settle moments in the past. And there's a lot of moments that I started visiting again where I was like, this didn't feel fun and this didn't feel fun. And I felt like he could sit with me and be like, yeah, it wouldn't feel good. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I wasn't protecting you. My heart was to be a protector, but I didn't know how to do that in a loving manner.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. And so I got reconciliation in that. And then I got to tell, again, I went down the journey of being able to internalize saying, I love you. Here's what I love about you. And I got wrecked one day thinking about how much I loved my grandpa. And I was like, oh, under
all the pain for years and me just trying to survive as a young kid in that space, there was just a little boy that was screaming out inside of him, I love you, Grandpa. I just want to be close to you. I want to go hunting with you. I want you to come play with me. I think you're so fun to be around. I want you to teach me all these things that you're working on. I think it's fascinating, all the welding that you're doing and all the woodworking you're doing. Like, I want you to show me how to do this. Like, I was very aware of how much my soul longed to have that intimate masculine relationship with him, that he would be that to me. And he didn't have the capacity to do that. And that's okay. But I could feel the sense of like, he would have if he could have. And I could connect into moments seeing it. Like I saw moments where he started building stuff with me. And I was like, oh, like you would have. I'm going to see a moment of you building something with me. So anyways, I love that.
That was really, really profound for me.
Yeah. I think, I've worked with a lot of clients on this concept because we need to resolve things.
Yeah.
That's like a human need, is to move through the emotions. And a lot of people can't visualize their dead relative as kind or loving or forgiving or whatever. And I think for me, and that's what's happened for me with my mom's mom and her sister. So my mom's brother just died. So now the three people in the family that I grew up with, that was the family I grew up with: the mom, the brother, and the sister. And I felt close to the brother, but I didn't feel as close to the mom and the sister. When I recognized that I couldn't visualize them as kind towards me, imagining them in their most authentic state, I still thought their most authentic state was angry at me. What that showed me was that there was pain I hadn't processed.
Yeah.
It showed me that my walls were built up. And what a lot of people do is they think that visualization of their family that's dead still judging them is probably because that's true.
Yeah.
Like they actually believe that their imagination of judgment from beyond the grave is real, instead of being like, oh, this is like, to me, I was like, this is showing me how deeply I felt judged. This is showing me how deeply I felt misunderstood in my life from them. This is showing me how unsafe that I have felt in relationship with them. Because even, like for us, biblically, there's this verse about the cloud of witnesses cheering us on. And I actually am one who believes that our ancestors are cheering us on. They're wanting us to choose redemption. Yeah. Every choice that we can make towards redemption for our family line, I think it's to impact going generations back. So I feel like the concept that family is cheering us on, like I believe in that concept. But then I'm imagining my aunt and my grandma and other people are cheering me on and they're just like, And so what I started doing was I started with just the intention. Okay, heart, I actually want to move through the anger, the fear, the freeze, the walls that you have with them so that you can reconcile, so that you can let down your guard. And then I started even saying that like in my counseling sessions, I was like, I want to resolve some issues with some dead relatives.
Yeah.
Why? Because I don't want this huge pocket in my heart of accusation and judgment existing. Like it still affects me, even if I shove it to the side. And so I just started beginning with like the intention of, and then purposefully being like, heart, you can grieve. And starting to process with my friends, like, oh, I didn't realize that I had a lot of pain from my aunt and grandma. I didn't realize how deeply those relationships really affected me. And so I've kind of like set my intention, and I haven't put a timeline on how it needs to go. I'm like, I love the pace of healing. So I'm like, one piece at a time can come. But I was in a session the other day and we were thinking about something positive, and all of a sudden my aunt, this picture of my aunt and my mom, she was like, whatever the question was, like picture somewhere safe or something. I pictured myself in the RV that my aunt bought. There was this like little cubby hole I could hide in. And I pictured myself sitting in there, and my mom and my aunt were just talking in the RV. And I felt so safe in that place. And it was shocking to me that my body had a memory of my aunt feeling so safe.
Wow.
And feeling so homey. And then I started thinking about my aunt, because she bought a convertible and a RV and drove it to her house. And I was like in awe of that. And so my counselor was like, wow, your aunt was showing you a totally different side of femininity, because my aunt was single and independent and living her best life with her convertible and RV. And that was very different than what my mom's life looked like. And so she was like, how amazing that you got to see multiple versions of femininity, and how amazing. And I started just this, I had all of these really positive emotions inside release in my heart about like, wow, there really was some gifts. There were some things that I loved about my aunt. And then thinking through like, I wanted a convertible the rest of my life. And then I got one, and realizing there's something that me and my aunt have in common, that we found something that we loved, that both of us loved. And it was this really positive, I didn't grieve at all. I was just remembering something good and something safe. And so I knew like, oh, this is the beginning of taking steps towards grieving the wall. Like I would say there's a chasm in my heart, and I'm slowly stepping towards grieving that, but with the belief that we can do that. And I believe like I could have dreams, I could have memories, I could grieve out things. Like I don't have to have a face-to-face conversation with them to get resolve and redemption. Yes. I can actually get resolve and redemption no matter what.
Yeah. So, and speaking resolve and redemption, you know, my grandma I wanted to add on this, because my grandma was a whole different mix. I kind of put her really, especially in the dead zone.
In your internal heart.
In my internal heart.
Before she died.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was really hard. Like there were aspects of my grandpa, because I could see the mischievous, playful little boy who wanted to be connective and stuff like that. I couldn't get the read from my grandma in that way. There was something about probably some childhood pain that caused her to not necessarily not know how to do connectiveness. And I also observed she was someone who participated in a lot of town gossip, some of the people who gossiped a lot. So the standard that was set inside of my head is that who you pose to be in front of us isn't truly who you are. Who you are is this other person over here who actually has a lot of different feelings towards everyone. And so I can't trust you.
Right.
And so I was super guarded.
You had more walls towards her than your grandpa.
I had way more walls. There was it was much easier for me to go to the redemptive expression of Arnie than it was for Vicky. And it's interesting because before she died, she finally did call and apologize. And she actually said, like, I've been a coward my entire life when it came to owning these types of messes that I've made, and I ran from them. And I mean, that was very courageous of her to be able to do that. But for me, when I was going through some of my heart process with my grandpa, I reflect on my grandma. I'm like, man, she's lost in some sort of dead zone. And I don't know how to get to that. And I really sat down and started the process of having an inner dialogue of, Grandma, I want to know how to forgive you.
I love that you're bringing this up. I was literally just going to bring up the idea of forgiving the dead.
Yeah.
Because we can get trapped in a hell on earth.
Yeah.
When we don't forgive.
Well, these are, I mean, no pun intended, but these are rotting corpses in our soul.
Yeah.
That end up getting stuck. Like, let me back up on this. A lot of people, once people have died, don't like visiting that area anyways.
Absolutely.
Period. Death in
there's
itself.
so much grief.
It has so much grief inside of it. So it's like the good, the bad, all of it. We just kind of want to put it off to the side. Sometimes if we are going to tiptoe into it, we try to only tiptoe into the good stuff. And just be like, oh, everything was great. We heroicize them or we vilify them on the other side of it. We're like, they were a terrible person. I'm glad they're gone. We lose the capacity for kind of the nuance of humanity. And to really take a deep dive again is really scary. So for me, it was very valuable because I'm like, in order for me to move forward really healthily, I want to clear out the places that I hold unforgiveness and judgment inside of my heart, not just with the people who are in front of me, but the people who are long gone. They might be long gone in life, like we may never talk again, but they're still alive somewhere. But I wanted to go a step further and I wanted to be like, but what about those who I've lost along the way? What kind of conversations do I have to have in my heart with them in order to not carry this anymore? And for my grandma, I had to, in my process of saying, I want to forgive you, I acknowledged I didn't know how to see you differently. Like, Grandma, I had a hard time seeing past the walls. I was trying to get a glimpse at who you really were, but I didn't know how to do that. And it was this question of like, I want to see that now. I want to see who you were. I want to see who the little girl was. And that was a question. Like when I'm asking that, it's a question to God I'm asking in, the conversations happening with this representation of Grandma, but it's a conversation between me and God. Like, God, show me the heartbeat of who Grandma really was. Give me a higher perspective, an eternal perspective of who she was so that I could actually humanize her. And so there was a big, big process of after she passed, me going deeper and deeper into my journey of humanizing her until I could truly, like when she died, I don't think I shed a tear over her death. Like she was that dead to me. I was just like, okay, Vicky's gone. On with life. And I had to think about this, like, oh, it's sad to me that there is an impact of her death. And not just because someone died, but it was sad to me. I had to look at it and be like, oh, that's sad to me that she died and I didn't have response because that shows how much pain was unresolved inside of me.
Totally.
And so as I navigated through my pain and was healing more of it, then I could find myself in deep grief, like, oh, I'm so sad that I didn't actually get to encounter a grandma that was nurturing. Like she could make apple pies, like her acts of service was where she could kind of show up at, but her warmness wasn't necessarily ever there. And me being able to engage in the grief of like, oh, I didn't get to encounter the nurture nature of a grandma and her nurture nature, which was inside of her, buried under all of her pain.
Yeah. So
for me, that was highly impactful. And it how do I say this? It helped me perpetuate humanizing people here on earth as it is. Like if I could go all the way to humanizing somebody that's dead, I could come into this situation with people on earth and be like, the reality is you are an eternal being. And right now I'm just getting the messiest parts of your expression at times, but you will cross over and your redeemed expression of yourself will fully be able to be revealed. So what does it look like for me to imagine that right here and right now in this situation?
Yeah. No, it's really beautiful and it's really powerful. And one of the things that you've done is you've made this decision, like, I want to be somebody who has reconciliation and forgiveness in my life. Like that's a core value. It's a staple. I want to not live in unforgiveness. I want to choose love, reconciliation, and redemption. And so because that has been a core value of yours, you're like, I want to do that to people who are gone. I want to do that to people who are here. And what we don't understand is that is how we become a whole person, is when we get to choose, oh, I'm going to have reconciliation everywhere in my life because I have the choice to do that. Whether or not people choose into that reconciliation does not impede my own journey, my own soul journey.
Well, I think that we as human beings view ourselves as separate from one another. Mm-hmm. And it's understandable that we do, but I've talked about this before, but we're all cut from the same cloth of love. We all come from the exact same source. And the more that, we think about the eternal aspect of somebody's being, like we get a much broader perspective, and it actually begins to eliminate judgment inside of our lives when I can say, I'm not better than you. I'm not separate from you. We are all one. Like when we get down to it, we are all one. And inside of that, all of a sudden to have hatred in my heart towards someone else is to have hatred in my heart towards myself. Mm-hmm. Really, when you think about the context of that, when I have love in my heart towards other people, it's loving on myself. But this bigger perspective, again, creates a dynamic in our lives where judgment doesn't have so much room to live. So that goes into the people who hurt us in the worst ways. I'm like, yes, they definitely did hurt me in a real way. And that has to be acknowledged. And I'm not going to look past the effects of them operating outside the bounds of love on my life. I'm going to address that. And I'm going to see them as like, yeah, but they're an extension of me. Mm-hmm. And that's going to dictate much differently the way that I extend forgiveness, the way that I extend grace, the way that I extend mercy inside of circumstances.
I want to share a story, but then if you might have something to say about Terry Ann. I'm not sure. If that's one of the,
I do.
The people you want to talk about. But I was thinking about, I have several people that I've helped work through the death of a parent or whatever. And a lot of times we get so locked in our own shame, our own guilt about somebody dying and how they died. So we have a friend who, their mom died of ALS, which is a horrible disease to watch. And the situation was traumatic in so many different ways. And so him not reconciling to get to like that place of feeling like he and his mom are good was because he had so much shame. He felt like he failed her. He felt like he made a mess. He felt like he wasn't a good enough son. And a lot of times we avoid trying to resolve things because of our own shame. But the thing is, so it didn't matter how far he got from the death, how many years went by. There's this part of him frozen and locked up in self-hatred and shame. And oftentimes we project that onto our dead person. Like, I feel shame. They must be frustrated with me. Mm-hmm. Oh, I feel like I failed them. They must feel like I failed them. And I think that that's, again, so tormenting to imagine somebody who's dead disliking you.
Totally.
But it's so easy to do. And so we've gotten to be there in several moments, like where he's starting to unthaw and recognize being able to just say out loud the things he did have shame. Like sometimes it's just that, like I've had to process out loud the things I have shame about my mom. Like I feel sad about some of the ways that I haven't been able to love her. And so I actually need to say it out loud so the shame doesn't eat me from the inside out.
Yeah.
And then the concept with him is beginning to say it out loud so people can actually speak truth and love and meet him in there and begin to see it differently. And we got to have a moment with him where he was letting down that shame wall, the defense he'd had of like, I must have failed. I must have been a horrible son. My mom must have been so frustrated with me. And us being able to be like, your mom wants you to live.
Yeah.
Like she wants you to come alive. She doesn't want your whole life to be trapped in her death.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't want you to get stuck hating yourself for her death. She doesn't want you to get tied to her death and to never live again. Like that's not her dream for your life. Like dead relatives want us to live our best lives.
Mm-hmm.
I really do believe I had another friend, she told me this story about
well, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Like as someone who's walked off this earth and you're back in the eternal space, why wouldn't you be like, I want you to succeed. I'm excited for you. I want you to grow and experience love in its greatest capacities. Like,
yeah. Well, and I've read so many stories or met people who like visited heaven or had near-death experiences, and they saw their family, more people than they knew, cheering for them.
Yeah.
And they also saw that their family was praying that they could experience a redemption for something they went through.
Mm.
And so the concept of like us living our lives and coming alive to love and growing and us forgiving actually gets to bring redemption back to our family members who didn't get to forgive.
Yeah.
Us choosing love brings redemption to our family members who didn't get to choose love. Us finding our authentic self under our crusty coping mechanisms, that soft, tender, authentic expression of who we are, gets to be redeemed, gets to redeem our family line. There is something, in the Bible, genealogy was so important, the family line, because I think there is something that we get to be involved in a greater story than us, involved in a greater lineage than we're aware of, involved in something where the choices we make on earth get to have beautiful ripples into eternity, not just into the future legacy, but into our past legacy. There are people in heaven looking at my life being like, this is for my legacy. I want to see this for my legacy,
Yeah.
like, and not like wanting to control my life, but like cheering on me to run forward into who I'm made to be, as it is part of, like, because I'm part of their line and part of their inheritance.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so the thing I was mostly wanting to bring up is the idea that we are redemptive. We get to be redemptive, but some of the reasons we don't want to look back is our own shame.
Yeah.
And if you're listening to this, it is your time to actually face your shame and receive the forgiveness you need to receive. And if you need to, we have a God who is rich in forgiveness.
Yes.
And so if you're like, for me, I have to turn to that because I feel so sad. Like when my mom had to go into assisted living, there's so many reasons we couldn't get her to be next to me. And I feel so sad about that. And I know that I did my best. And also, I've asked God for forgiveness. And I've asked her for forgiveness, her spirit, because her mind doesn't understand.
Yeah.
But it's that sense of I still get to engage resolve, even though I can't fix it.
Yeah, that's good.
And I get to walk through the shame and I get to let people into that because none of us is meant to be trapped. We have the capacity for healing in every area.
Yeah. I know that you made mention of me sharing a little bit about Terry Ann. I think that...
Well, I didn't know if you had any dreams or experiences that you had to work through after she died.
Well, Terry Ann was one of my best friends in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And she passed away in a drinking and driving accident. She was thrown from the car. And let's see. She came to me. So I had a dream just after she died. And she came to me. She was like, hey, Stumball. And I was like, Terry, you're dead. And she's like, I know I'm dead. I'm like, what are you doing here? And she's like, I just came to say hi. And I was like, okay. And she began to tell me about how much she loved me and cared about me and that she's doing okay. And she said, I want you to tell Tammy that I'm sorry that I missed her birthday.
Oh my gosh.
And Tammy was a girl that I wasn't friends with. That was part of her other friend circle. I didn't know anything about Tammy whatsoever. I was like, okay, so that Friday, I end up going to the movie theater where Tammy worked. And I said, Tammy, here's my dream. And I tell her. And Terry had just missed her birthday. Tammy starts crying. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is wild. Like, message delivered, right? And throughout the years, Terry Ann would come to me and she would say, hey, Stumble. And I'd be like, Terry, you're dead. Over and over again. And like my dreams over and over again. She'd be like, Stumble, we talk about this every time I come visit you. Yes, I'm dead. I know that I'm dead. I just came to say hi. I want you to know that you matter to me. I wanted to see how you're doing and talk with you. And I'd wake up, this is crazy. Like I keep having these experiences. Now, what's the point in me sharing that? One of the aspects is that it helped me continually be aware of eternity in a much bigger dynamic. Grief is so much harder to process when we lose people, when we believe that this is the end. Mm-hmm. This is the end. I'll never see them again. We have a very limited view of life. Oftentimes, it's such a limited scope. But there's something about when someone transitions and you're very well aware of eternity, mm-hmm. that you can be like, yeah, like there's grief to be had. I won't get to exchange these forms of experiences with them within the space of earth. But there's a promise that there's a reconnect. There is goodness that's happening free from the weight of the sufferings that we experience here in this place, and almost an excitement. Like I've grown excitements about people that I've lost in my life where I'm like, oh, I can't wait till I get to see you again, instead of like, oh, you're gone. Like there's still some like, oh, it'd be nice to see how they express themselves on earth. But there's a sense of excitement and hopefulness of like, one day I'm going to get to hang out and we're going to talk about the exchanges that we had here in this space. And I think it's worth noting because, again, a lot of people struggle a lot with the loss of others inside of their lives. And from the conversation we're having here of like, ooh, we can actually still reconcile pain points, forgiveness points, and even unto we can reconcile this loss isn't forever. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of beauty that we'll get to exchange in another space. It actually lightens the load of the whole conversation. And it makes death a much more approachable conversation.
Yeah. And I was thinking about how you had to do a short film for maybe like a thesis in film school. Uh-huh. Yeah. And you wrote a story that honored Terry Ann. Uh-huh. And I was just thinking like so much beautiful art, the John Mark McMillan song, Oh, How He Loves Us was written as a tribute to his friend who died. Yeah. And I just think when we don't avoid the pain of death and we actually choose to like dig into the expression of our grief and honoring people's roles in our life for however long they were in our life and whatever the season was, and finding ways to actually honor that, it releases beauty onto the planet. It releases redemption onto the planet. It releases hope. And there's something where we get to reconcile. And I was thinking just to encourage people, wherever you're at with whoever you know, and even some of you might be listening and they're not dead. They're like still on the planet, but they're dead to you. Like all relationship is ended or there's not a way to resolve things. Like we still can have creative ways to tribute to people, to process through our grief with people. I'm thinking about our friend Mariah, whose cousin died, and it sparked this play that she wrote. And she wrote this play in honor of the wrestle of faith she was having to have because of her cousin's death. And I just think there is an invitation to engage with the beauty of life, even when we're stuck in the grief of death.
Yeah. And I think that death can be something that we allow to take us out, or it can be something that sparks us into a more abundant life.
A deeper connectedness to ourselves, a deeper connectedness to others, a deeper gratitude for the people around us. So, one thing that I'm thinking would be fun is if you have a story where you had a dream like Justin did about Terry Ann, about somebody coming back to you and sharing, or you had someone die and you gave a tribute to them and it was meaningful. I know one of my close friends, when her son died, she was giving, she was talking about the pain of being ripped away from her son and how painful that was. And all of a sudden she thought about her niece who was adopted and was like, oh, she got ripped away from her mom, even though it was a different circumstance. Like the tearing of a mom from their child, she experienced, even though I experienced it from my son dying. And she ended up like talking about how painful that was and saying, we want you and we love you. And the niece was like sobbing and she was sobbing. And they found this whole new connection point. Like if you have a story of redemption around death or a story of the healing process you've gone on or reconciling after they're dead, we would love to hear it. I think it'd be a really fun episode to do a follow-up on. And have a couple people's stories here. So if that's something you've experienced or you go on that journey from listening to this, write us and let us know. You can find us on Instagram.
You can actually just go to justinandabby.com and there's a place to send a message.
Podcast.
Yeah. That was a good conversation. I like that. Hey, look, if you've been impacted by this episode and it's caused you to think differently in life or challenge you, I just say, subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to the podcast, share it with other people. We really just do this because we want to see people's lives impacted with conversations that people don't normally have a lot of.
Also, we have the Father series. I kept thinking about that because you have some of the most powerful episodes on the Father series about the redemption journey that you went on
with my grandpa,
with your grandpa and other men. And it's powerful. And if you're like, I need help getting to resolve and redemption with my dad, dead or alive, the Father series can help you with that.
Yeah. So I'm done. You done?
I'm done.
We're out. We love you guys.
Bye for now.
Bye.